You know, there is something kind of beautiful about, ending one year on a very frustrating note, but then opening up a new year by being able to beat up on the Bears. Some things are just classic. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. I'm your host, John Dowray. Today, we are reviewing Packers versus Vikings. Oh, the game that was. I'm not going to say it was good, but oh, the game that did indeed occur. Now, let me just say this to start off. Okay? They deserve to be taken to task for this game, and I'm sure the coaching staff is hopefully doing plenty of that this week. The Packers ultimately looked like a team on Sunday that, one, had forgotten what fun looks like, two, had forgotten what passion looks like, and three, had forgotten what executing looks like. They kind of just dropped the ball on all three. So you're going to hear a lot of negativity in that way, right? Last week, it was all like, here's all the shout outs. They're brilliant. And then like one kind of sort of ish get out. Well, this week it's like, flip that coin over because it's mostly bad. But, okay, there is some framing here. One, you all know that I'm not the type to be like, oh, they lost, fire Goot. Fire LaFleur, blow it up. Go trade for Devontae again or some other stupid crap. No, like I don't get into the inflammatory stuff. But what I can say is that this was a bad football game. It was a very disappointing football game. That doesn't mean that now they're a bad football team, and it certainly doesn't mean that they're not going to win any playoff games at all. But it does mean that there absolutely are long-term trends that we've seen time and time again this season, or even some things from a roster building standpoint that probably should have been circled a little earlier than they have been, that maybe Goot should have done something about it. And this loss was kind of emblematic of all of that. So they played like crap. This was a bad game. Are they a bad team? No. So I want to get that out in the forefront before anyone's like, oh, you're too negative. No, like that's not the case. They can still beat anybody, but not if they play like they did on Sunday. This is still a very, 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 very good football team, though. So last week, everything was positive except for one category. This week, flip that over. So let's get to it, right? Let's go to the shout outs. First, the first good one, Edgerrin Cooper's run defense. Look, the stats tell a story, right? 8 solo tackles, 1 assisted, 6 of which were stops. And it's like that alone is good. But then you watch it, and it's so much more impactful than just the stat sheet. Because you read that, and it's like, oh, that's good. And then you watch it, it's like, oh, that's really good. He was an absolute heat-seeking missile against Aaron Jones and company. So there weren't many stars in this game. But this week, again, say it with me, boy, does his star shine brightly. Next up, and like, there are not many in this game, right? But there's one player that didn't play much that I think actually played better and deserves credit. And that's Devontae Wyatt. This was not a huge game for Wyatt by any means, really. But it was impactful. The Vikings do not have a great interior offensive line. We talked about that. Garrett Bradbury at center is having a very rough year. Then there's Brandel the guard who's having another rough year, right? The place that the Packers could have had success in the pass rush was up the middle. And for whatever reason, be it being afraid of leaving his coverage on an island or whatever, Jeff Hafley didn't seemingly want to execute blitzes in that area, even though it's where the Vikings suck. So questionable there. But Devontae Wyatt tried in limited snaps to make his impact felt. He played 12 snaps total. 12 of them were of the pass rushing variety. And in those 10 pass rushing snaps, he had 4 hurries. Not just pressures, 4 hurries. 40% of his pass rushing snaps resulted in quarterback hurries. And this isn't a game where the pass rush just couldn't do a dang thing. They could not get after Darnold, but Wyatt at least did some, and it deserves highlighting. By the way, there was one other Packer who logged 4 hurries. Kenny Clark. Except it literally took Kenny Clark 3 times as many snaps as Devontae Wyatt to do the same thing. Clark had 4 hurries in amongst 30 snaps. An overall pretty unproductive game for Clark again. Wyatt got it done in only 10. One more shout out that before we really get into the meat of things here, the team does deserve kudos for not packing it in. There were some things in this game that felt like we had walked back in time, and I'll get to those. But ultimately, this Packers team didn't give up. They did keep fighting. Now, it obviously didn't get there. It was too little too late. But nonetheless, there were games in the past where we would have seen this team, especially under prior leadership, not continue to fight. To say, all right, let's just pack her in. Let's get to the next week. Let's go beat up on the Bears next week. This team didn't do that. And they do deserve kudos, at least for that effort. So, okay. Now the pleasantries are out of the way. Let's flip it and let's go to the get outs. And there are lots of directions to go here. Like lots. And frankly, I enjoy bringing to shoutouts and get outs some form of insight. Because when you watch a game, right, a lot of things are very, very straightforward. And then you watch it a second time and then you look at the stat sheet and you look at the numbers and you can be like, oh, it wasn't that bad, or it wasn't that good, or, oh, here's some more context to that, right? This is why that might have occurred. But it really felt like watching this Vikings game, and I got that confirmed now. This was just incredibly straightforward. The product that we saw on the field is basically exactly what occurred. And so I don't have this like breadth of numbers or further insights. So there's lots of different directions we can go here, but it's like every single one of them is exactly what we saw. So let's just start here. Just in general, the first get out kind of has to go to the team's leaders. All of them. On the field, off the field. So let's start with off the field. Matt LaFleur. I don't think we can say with any real gusto here that the team was schematically or emotionally ready to take on the Vikings. They entered the game flat. Then they had an early game mess up in the form of a Josh Jacobs fumble. And then they just couldn't figure out how to get any type of momentum back. When they did make adjustments and start having some success, it was way too little, way too late. When they actually decided to play with some urgency and use it as their advantage, again, it was too little, too late. So let's just focus on just the game plan itself for a second. Matt LaFleur, he admitted that they were thrown off by the Vikings playing so much man coverage. Why though? Because coming into the game, Love was first in EPA against zone coverage and like 22nd against man. The Packers receivers, especially when Watson isn't out there, are known to struggle against man. We've seen that before this year. And Flores is a good DC. So why in the world would a defensive coordinator who's good at his job not look at the Green Bay Packers, look at Love struggle against man, look at the wide receiver struggle against man, and not play man? So why was LaFleur Love shocked when he rolled out man as much as they did? Just because he hadn't done it before? But that's one of the things the Vikings do. They're hyper aggressive. They adapt a lot week by week. That's part of the Patriot in Flores. So switching to man was a fairly easy thing I think you could have predicted. And the proof is out there. Like, there were other content creators. Now, I didn't say it myself in the pregame show, but I know for a fact that there were others out there saying that you could expect the Vikings to roll out a whole lot of man, especially if Christian Watson isn't playing. So if the uneducated are the ones saying it, then it certainly shouldn't have caught the Packers by surprise. And it shouldn't have been something that was so incredibly hard to adapt to then. And yet, per Matt LaFleur's own words, it was surprising and it was difficult to adapt to. And that just shouldn't be the case. So looking on another front, let's just take a look at like the LaFleur-Love relationship. Jordan Love is a rhythm quarterback. I swear, I have said this before. When the podcast ends in a couple weeks, you can put that on its tombstone. Jordan Love, rhythm QB. Here lies John screaming for an up-tempo offense. Right? I've said it before and I'll say it again. The man needs rhythm. We need consistency from Jordan Love. What he needs is some tempo, some opportunity to get into a rhythm. There's a reason he's a slow starter. There's a reason why he's a second half QB, or why the third quarter looks oftentimes a lot better than the second quarter. And it's because he needs that rhythm. And I just can't look at this offense. Now, I know prior to this game against Minnesota, go back to New Orleans, go back to Seattle, right? The offense put up a lot of points. But even in those 34-point efforts, even in the 30-point efforts, it still felt as though the ceiling wasn't being reached. Like they were getting the results, assuredly, but they were not reaching their peak. And it's also hard for me to say that in amongst those victories was Jordan Love being done a ton of favors in this one particular regard. I just don't see any effort to recognize that this is who he is and this is the way that we need to play. And that's gotta correct. Because in past years, we always used to complain incessantly about Joe Barry's defense and how they'd play on their heels, how they let the offense come to them rather than being hyper aggressive, rather than being athletic, rather than playing on your toes and trying to dictate what the offense does. You're just trying to predict what they do and then react accordingly, rather than some of the league's best defenses that try to flip the script and dictate what they do. And it feels like with this Green Bay offense, they are doing very, very well running the ball. LaFleur is finally sticking to the run, but it's like in doing so, he now is putting a cap on the rest of the offense. And I'm not talking about like depth of target or big time throws. I'm saying what we're seeing out of the passing offense. It's capped. It doesn't seem like it's in its fullest version like we saw it this time last year. It's more limited in scope. So I almost want to take that idea that we complained about with the defense forever and apply it to the offense. That they're playing on their heels. That they're trying to guess what the defense is going to do and playing to that, as opposed to just walking up to the line and saying, hey, we're good at football. And we're young. We have no clue what we're doing. But we're really athletic. We're really fast. And Jordan Love's got a really strong arm. And we're just going to run through you. We're going to run through you. And then when you adapt to the run, then I'm just going to pepper it over the top. And we're going to dictate the way that this game goes. We're not going to rely on guys having to be schemed open. We're going to use our ultra athletic guys that we've drafted and invested in, and they're just going to beat whoever lines up in front of them. And the thing is, the Packers just don't seem that interested in actually doing that, at least in the passing game realm. I think Josh Jacobs absolutely has brought that element to the run game. But I don't think we can say that for the other side of things like we could at this time last year. So what I would say is, hurry up, get up to the line, and go play football. One thing, I watched Washington the other day, and one thing that we could see with Washington, rarely did their play clock get down to 5. It was snapped. The ball was snapped a lot of times, even at 10. Well, with the Green Bay offense, it's just like Rodgers is back. The play clock oftentimes going under 5. Why? So that he can play Tweedledinks at the line and try to figure out what they're. That's all well and good. Fine. Okay. That's the nuance of the position. Okay. Jordan Love is not Aaron Rodgers. Get him moving. Because these are two different quarterbacks. And yet I see it just like I saw it in the first half of last year. They're being treated the same, at least in this regard. And it's a misuse of a very talented quarterback. And it's a disservice to the entire offense to have them so out of rhythm, to play so slow when they're basically a bunch of toddlers with ADD. Let them go play, right? It feels like a graduated offense of the first half of last year. So I think at this point, they just got to trust the team and unleash something. And again, I'm saying this about an offense that has put up 30 in like 5 of the last 6 games. But even in some of those performances, like against the Saints, what was the one drawback from that win? The passing offense just didn't look right. Didn't look up to snuff. Didn't look like it was ready to go on a tear. And this is what's got to get fixed to really get there, right? And then this is probably what you got to fix in order to hang with some of the NFC's best teams. So now moving past the passing operation a bit more, like let's further go into it. Jordan Love wasn't great. I think I already covered why. He was probably a little bit better than what the box score is going to show, or like what it felt like watching in real time, but it still wasn't great. So now let's be honest about the other aspect of the passing game, and that's the Packers wide receivers have ultimately been fairly disappointing. Jaden Reed was an early season revelation, but at this point, man, you got to just catch the damn ball. And the scheme may be rough, but like I say, it doesn't matter. If the scheme is the greatest scheme in the history of the world on offense, if you don't catch the ball. It doesn't matter if you have the greatest scheme in the history of the world on defense. It doesn't matter if you cannot tackle. If the fundamentals are not accomplished, like tackle the dude with the ball or catch the ball, then it doesn't matter. You're not going to do anything. So Jaden Reed has continued his process of not catching the ball. And this overall, even per PFF's tracking, was a very rough game in totality for Jaden Reed. But by the way, I did want to throw in this little anecdote. For receivers with at least 33 targets on the year, guess who the top 4 are in terms of drop percentage? Dontavian Wicks. He still leads the league. But he's tied for the league lead now with Alan Lazard. 3rd, Jaden Reed. 4th, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Are you noticing a trend? Goot, this is where I judge you. So, I mean, ultimately, when you go back and watch this game, please, someone, anyone, get open. Because as good as Dontavian Wicks has the reputation of being a man beater, it wasn't there enough against all of this man coverage. Jaden Reed certainly wasn't getting open. Romeo Doubs wasn't. Like Christian Watson was alarmingly missed in this game. And keep in mind too, Jordan Love is the anti-Aaron Rodgers in terms of like getting up there post-game. He generally has the LaFleurian, like, no, it's on me. It's on me. It's not anybody else. I got to be better. Even after the Vikings game, he was talking about how like the wide receivers, how the whole operation has to be better. Now, as the wide receivers have got to beat somebody. And it's true. The wide receivers got manhandled by Minnesota's corners, and they just had no answers. They did not seem fired up. They didn't seem ready to go. Their piss was ice cold. It was a rough performance. So lastly, I want to look at it this way. The leadership on the field. It's really, really hard to win a game when your best players don't show up. And so, like, if we want to look at the young guys, okay, fine. Jaden Reed didn't show up. Dobbs, all right, they're all 30 and younger. But Kenny Clark was rendered pretty ineffective. Rashawn Gary had a whopping 2 pressures. Josh Jacobs had that early game fumble. Xavier McKinney had quite possibly his worst game as a Packer, biting on fakes that he normally doesn't. Then you got Zach Tom, who blew a touchdown with a penalty. He also gave up 3 pressures. Rasheed Walker gave up 4. And I know some of them are still young, but ultimately, like, these are a lot of the guys that when you look at and say, these are the guys that the team is built around. Zach Tom, Xavier McKinney, the ghost of Jair Alexander, wherever he went. Like, these guys either aren't playing off the field or they're not playing on the field. And I'm not saying it's necessarily an effort problem, but like, these are the guys that we're supposed to look to game in and game out and say like, all right, Kenny Clark looked at a bad center and took over the game. Rashawn Gary took over the game. Xavier McKinney with another pick, and we've seen that for him for a bunch of times this year. But kind of as the theme of the year is gone, their best guys did some of their worst work against the opposing best teams. I think the only star player that you can say from this game that totally like lived up to their billing was probably Elton Jenkins, who didn't allow a pass rushing stat. And to have him be the only one is probably not how you beat a 13-win team. So To sum it up, like, this was a bad game. There is not a lot of further context, greater insight to be pulled from this game, because what you saw is pretty much what was there. Are the Packers a good football team? Absolutely. Can they still, on any given Sunday, beat any team? Yes, absolutely. But a pass game that is out of sync, penalties, a lack of pass rush. If I were to tell you that those three things were to show up at any given time and doom the Packers season, would you be particularly shocked? No, because they're kind of the same three things that we've been talking about all year. Last year, we saw this marked improvement. This year, inconsistent improvement. And if the Packers are going to go on a deep playoff run, which they are 1,000% capable of, if they are going to, it's going to take fixing those things. Luckily, a game against the Bears could be the perfect time to just trot out the starters and go, Jordan Love, you're throwing it 60 times today. We are figuring out this passing offense once and for all. Go have fun, boys. I'd be down. It'd be a hell of a lot of fun. So let's get to that. Now, I didn't want this to sound resoundingly negative. They are a good team that can beat anyone. But the reality is, this is a really bad game. And they got some soul searching to do before a big playoff run begins. So thank you, everyone. Join me tomorrow. Claudia and I will be here at 4 o'clock for LTB Live at 4 o'clock on New Year's Day. Do hope everyone has an absolutely fantastic night. Please be safe, be responsible, but enjoy your New Year's Eve as we ring in 2025 tomorrow and what hopefully kicks off with a Super Bowl season for the Green Bay Packers. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night tonight. And as always, go Pack Go.